Hello and welcome to another episode of Putt Putt Productions Presents. Today I wanted to talk to you about names. But before we begin, let me say hi to Jolene. Hi, Jolene. Anyway, that's for a friend of mine. Anyway, I've been thinking a lot about names recently. Names in fantasy and names in mythology. If you have somebody's true name, it means you can control them to have their true name. When we give somebody in a name, we imbue that name with everything that is about them. You know, when we say mother, there is a lot that goes in. That's a name in itself. It's a title and it's a name. And we put a lot into that. When we misspell names or mispronounce them, people get noticeably irritated. You're saying something about them when things are misspelled or mispronounced at them. I grew up with my name being mispronounced at me. I've just gotten to the point where I just automatically assume everybody who meets me will mispronounce my last name. It is O-L-I-V as in Victor, I-E-R. That's Olivier. Not Oliver, not Olivier, but Olivier. And despite the fact that it means the same thing as Oliver and Olvera and Olivieri, I still get put out when it's not pronounced Olivier. The same thing goes for people with their first names. Rachel's, when we first meet, the first question we ask each other, how do you spell it? R-A-C-H-E-L or R-A-C-H-A-E-L? It tells us who we are. I have a friend who's a Diana, and even though it's a small thing, she gets very irritated when people forget the A and just call her Diane. You know, everyone's got their... I have a friend who's a Teresita, and it's not T-H-E-R, it's T-E-R-E, Teresita. It's who she is. This name is who she is. And we take that meaning we have, these names we give to each other. It makes us individuals, makes us feel who we are. And we transfer that to everything else in our lives. You know, we might name our car. We name our stuffed animals. And some of us still do name our stuffed animals. We give titles to things. We title our books. That lets people know what it's about. But sometimes those titles also become something of themselves. For example, the Holy Bible is not just the title of a book anymore. It has come to mean something huge. It's got a whole set of meanings depending on who the person is who's hearing it. And when we refer to something and say it is the Bible of knowledge, it's the Bible in sci-fi fantasy, we're saying it has all the knowledge of sci-fi fantasy. We use that term to coin another term because there's so much meaning behind it, and it's the name of a book. Anyway, while I was thinking about these names, because of my recent experience with misspelled names, and I had a couple of titles on short stories last month that got misspelled in different publications, it just made me think about how important that is to our culture. Not just our culture, but cultures around the world. How you address somebody and how you say their name and what that name means and making sure it's correct. It's important in every single culture. So much so that even though we've got a saying that says, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words can never hurt you. Well, we still call each other names when we're angry. Not that we should, but it happens. And one of the reasons name calling is so hurtful and gets put on the shelf there with bullying is because it is taking away from the identity of the person that you're calling that name. So instead of calling them by their name and identifying them correctly as the unique individual they are, you're calling them something in a derogatory manner. It's name calling, and you're taking away from their identity. And that's why it's so important. That's why names are so important. That's why it's so hurtful. You take that a step farther, and how how we go through life with our names and how we recognize the dead with their names. One of the reasons I was thinking about this is I was trying to figure out a poem to read, and there's a poem I have that was never published, but I don't know that it's publishable because it's basically a responsive reading. If you grew up in a Baptist or Baptist type church, or maybe in any other type of church, I don't know, but in the church I grew up in, Southern Baptist Church, we had responsive readings, and they were not hymns. They were readings where the preacher would read a portion of text, and then the congregation would respond with another portion of the text. And it would be kind of a conversation between the preacher and the congregation. And there was one point where I was working at AIDS Project Los Angeles for about 1.5 years or so, and I was working in the home health department. And that's the department that helped clients between the time when they could take care of themselves and the time when they needed to go to a hospice. And it was a very brief amount of time, but it was, that's when respite care was provided. They were still living at home, but they needed somebody to come in and help them with things. And we helped with that. Our nurse case managers would go out and visit and make sure they were getting the care they needed. And I was an administrative assistant, and it was my special job to make sure the names were correct, to file things. Every week or every month I had to go through a certain phone line or go through a certain database and make sure the names lined up correctly with the numbers, because then that's the only way we could get funding, was to make sure that everything was up to date. And it was the only way we could make sure that the funding we got to our clients was to make sure that everything was up to date. Their names were very important. And it struck me while I was doing this that this was, in a way, almost memorializing them before they passed away. Because that's one of the things that's important to us as people, is wondering if we're going to be remembered. Our names will be remembered after we're gone. We have the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. to recognize people. All those names recognize those people who fought in the Vietnam War. We have the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier for people whose names we've lost but fought to protect us. So in thinking about those things back then, and with my background with the responsive reading, I wrote this poem that, like I said, is not really publishable because it needs to be read aloud. And it needs to be read aloud in a room with people who also have access to it, because the poet, or one person, the reader, reads one line, and the congregation, or the other people, audience, if you will, responds with another line. So I'm going to attempt to read this poem for you. I wrote it it was about the same time frame as the Names Quilt was out, so it's called Names, kind of in reference to that, because it is a way of, I was trying to deal with the clients that were passing away, and the fact that all of us at APLA, AIDS Project Los Angeles, were having to deal with people who were dying, and that's not easy. That's just not an easy thing to do. So, the name of this poem that I'm going to read for you today is called Names, a Responsive Hymn. Death is the framework of their professions. Names. I don't go to their memorials, she stated in her quietly reasonable voice. All the names. The same voice that announces that yoga is at 7 a.m. every Monday morning. Names that laughed and joked. I always know I can fall back on my professionalism, said another one. Names who told stories. Using the same voice she uses to conduct meetings. Names who made light of their demise. Check to see if they're still sucking air, he asked as he handed me the list. Names who didn't want to die yet, now. Eyes belie the indifference of the request. Gallows humor. Names that trail through my mind like beads on a rosary. They're my kids, she explained. Names that had to let go and die. Stories lost. Do it now, Buy it now. Feel it now. You could be like them. Names whose souls have fled disease-riddled bodies. My client's needs come first, he announced. Names deleted from the computer. He'll yell at me, he panicked, unable to keep a promise. Names embossed on so many memorial invitations. This is the framework of their lives. Names without end. Locked in a death struggle for life. Name of God. Anyway, sorry about that. It always makes me cry. I should remember that. So that's for this episode, not as happy and carefree as the others. Names, a response of him. You won't find it published anywhere because, like I said, it's not really publishable. It needs to be read in a room of people. Have a great day.